May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord my God. Amen. You may be seated. It's Transfiguration Sunday, the apex of the liturgical season we call Epiphany. After weeks of hints and intimations, a star, a dove, a baptizer's voice in the wilderness, today we emerge into full sunlight, blinded as God parts the veil and shows us Christ's majesty. All of the synoptic gospels tell the story of the Transfiguration, underscoring its importance to the early church, and over the centuries, the event has accumulated meanings, most of them abstractly theological. I have been taught that the Transfiguration is important because it reveals Jesus' divine nature, foreshadows his death, secures his place in the stream of Israel's salvific history, exalts him above the law, Moses, and the prophets, Elijah, and prefigures his resurrection. Weighty and important stuff, no doubt. But I'm not sure I like the Transfiguration. I'm not sure it serves us well. Here's why. People tend to measure depth and success of faith by the number of mountaintop experiences they can claim. Have you felt the Spirit in Sunday morning worship? Has Jesus spoken to you? Have you seen visions, spoken in tongues, encountered God's living presence in your dreams? Most of the time, the answer is no, which means many people spend most of their lives feeling like a spiritual failure. There's this stigma that deep and mature Christians have frequent experiences akin to Peter's on the mountaintop. They see visions and dream dreams. They have actual conversations with a God who speaks to them in audible English. Jesus reveals himself to them in spectacular ways they can't describe or deny. They don't have to squint and strain to discern God's presence. God shows up in their living rooms in technicolor glory and blows their minds. It's not true, of course. This hierarchy of holiness, this way of measuring piety, and yet it lingers in many people. This yearning for a particular kind of effective experience to come along on a regular basis and validate our faith. The truth is, we like and want and crave and covet Christian mountaintops. And stories like the Transfiguration don't help. If Peter could see Jesus in his full, unfiltered glory, why can't we? One of the many problems with our God on the mountaintop version of Christianity is that it prompts us to carve up and compartmentalize our lives, to separate sacred from secular, the mountain from the valley, and the spectacular from the mundane. As if God is somehow more present during a rousing worship set, a stirring sermon, or a silent retreat in a seaside monastery than God is when we're doing the laundry, returning a library book, or driving children to a friend's house. The work of discernment is harder and messier in everyday life, yes. We have to look for God minus blinding lights and roaring thunder. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. The God of the whisper is still God. In its worst iteration, mountaintop Christianity is addictive, such that we spend our days pursuing a high we conflate with spiritual success. When we don't experience that high, we feel empty, unloved, angry, or bored. Meanwhile, we don't notice the ever-present God in whom we actually live and move and have our being. Desperate for the mountain, we miss the God of the valley, the conference room, the schoolyard, the grocery store, the street corner. Worshipping the extraordinary doesn't make for a healthy faith. In our gospel reading this week, Peter responds to Jesus' transfiguration with an affirmation, immediately followed by a proposal. Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings, it is good for us to be here. Is it? Well, in some ways, yes. In some ways, Peter is absolutely right. It is good to set aside times and places for contemplation. It is good to gaze upon Jesus whenever and however he reveals himself to us. It is good to move out of our comfort zones and confront the indescribable otherness of the divine. Until the transfiguration happens. Peter and his fellow disciples experience Jesus as a teacher, a storyteller, a healer, and a traveling companion. His face, his manners, his voice, his mission, all are familiar to them. Familiar, endearing, and safe. Then one day, high up on a mountain, the unimaginable happens. Before their very eyes, Jesus changes, becoming at once both fully himself and fully unrecognizable. The man they think they know is suddenly more, suddenly other. And the path that lies ahead of him, a path that must end on another high place, a hill called Golgotha, upends everything the disciples think they understand about Jesus. Whenever we think we have God figured out, it's good to be reminded that we're wrong. Whenever we try to stuff Jesus into a theological, cultural, or political box for our own convenience, it's good to have that box blown open. Whenever we grow complacent, self-righteous, or lazy in our lives of faith, it is good to be brought to our knees by God, whose thoughts are not our thoughts, whose ways are not our ways. There are very good reasons to encounter Jesus on the mountain. On the other hand, it's not good to fixate on the sublime so much that we desecrate the mundane. Most of life is unspectacular, by which I mean most of life doesn't dazzle us with non-stop special effects, but all of life contains the sacred. The challenge is to cultivate the kind of sight that perceives God in places darker, murkier, and more obscure than a mountaintop. As soon as Peter affirms his experience, he tries to hoard it. When I hear in his plan to make dwellings is an understandable but ultimately misguided attempt to contain, domesticate, protect, and possess the sublime, to harness the holy, to make the fleeting permanent, to keep Jesus shiny, beautiful, and safe up on a mountaintop. After all, everything is so good up there, so clear, so bright, so unmistakably spiritual. Why not stay forever? Well, because God says no. Even before Peter is finished speaking, God covers him in a thick cloud and tells him to listen to Jesus, not to his own misconceptions about the life of faith. It's Jesus' way, the way of the valley, the way of the cross, the way of humility, surrender, and sacrifice that Peter must learn to follow. In Matthew's version of the Transfiguration event, the disciples are overcome with fear when God speaks to them out of the cloud. They cower in silence and fall to the ground. But then comes the part of the story I like. Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. Jesus comes and touches his friends. And in that simple, ordinary human encounter of skin on skin, the disciples catch their breath, shed their fear, and return to themselves. Finally, they see the divine in a guise they can bear. As it turns out, Peter, for all his eagerness and bluster, isn't made for unending transfigurations. He can't handle too much of the spectacular. All he can actually take of God's glory is a tender human hand on his shoulder and a reassuringly human voice in his ear. Here's the thing. It's okay to still yearn for mountaintop experiences. They'll come and go according to God's will and timing, not according to our micromanagement. In that sense, sublime spiritual experiences are easy. They require little from us. We can't control them. What's hard is consenting to follow Jesus back down the mountain. What's challenging is learning to cultivate awe and wonder in the face of the mundane. What's essential is finding Jesus in the rhythms and routines of the everyday, in the loving touch of a friend, in the human voices that say, "Don't be afraid," in the unspectacular business of discipleship, prayer, service, and solitude, in the unending challenge to love our neighbors as ourselves. With Transfiguration Sunday, we come to the end of another liturgical season. Having seen the bright lights of Epiphany, we prepare now for the long darkness of Lent. We can't know ahead of time what mountains and valleys lie ahead. We can't predict how God will speak and in what guise Jesus might appear. But we can trust in this. Whether on the brightest mountain or the darkest valley, Jesus abides. Even as he blazes with holy light, his hand remains warm and solid on our shoulders. Even when we're on our knees in the wilderness, he whispers, "Do not be afraid." So listen to the ordinary. Keep listening. It is good for us to be here. Amen. Announcements. Lent starts this week, technically. So Tuesday is our pancake dinner at 6. At 6, I'm right, yay. And Ash Wednesday service on Wednesday at 6 as well. And then the very first Sunday of Lent will be Sunday. And then are we doing a Lenten soup and supper? We're doing a Lenten soup and supper.
Look for that sign-up sheet later today. You can sign up for bring soup or help facilitate.
Wonderful. Any other announcements?
If anybody is available at, I would say between 4:30 and 5, I will be at the church to help cover crosses and other icons. That would be much appreciated.
We veil everything.
We veil everything, and it is time consuming, and also I'm sure that there's something I will miss. So,
And what time? When is this?
between 4:30 and 5, look
On
for my
Wednesday.
little red car on Wednesday.
Okay. Awesome.
Can we get a head start on Tuesday evening for you?
Sure,
Okay.
go right ahead. I will not be here on Tuesday evening, but you can do anything you want.
So one day, they will not make junior roller derby bouts on Sunday mornings. But until that time, the kids are at Western Skateland doing a bout that I'm hoping I will make the very tail end of after the service. So if I scoot out, it's because I'm going to go try and see them skate. But just so that you know and might plan if you're interested, Patton is trying out, and maybe Alex is trying out for the black and bluegrass junior roller derby team out of Kentucky. And so they will actually travel and do like full-on bouts rather than what's going on right now, which is like a scrimmage bout. So if they get on that team, they will probably be missing here more often than not sometimes, but they will be out and about enjoying some roller derby. So I think that's a really cool opportunity for them. So if you wouldn't mind keeping them in your prayers, I'd greatly appreciate that. Any birthdays or anniversaries? All right. Ascribe to the Lord the honor due his name, bring offerings and come into his courts.